After 12 agonizing hours of labor, my husband did not hand me a bouquet of flowers or gently kiss my forehead. He tossed a crumpled $20 bill onto my thin hospital blanket and told me to take the city bus home with our newborn daughter. He looked me dead in the eye and said he did not want the baby or the hospital smell ruining the pristine white leather interior of his brand new Tesla. My mother-in-law stood right next to him, nodding in complete agreement and calling me weak and spoiled for wanting a comfortable ride home. I just sat there holding my sleeping baby in complete silence. What they did not know was that I could have bought that entire hospital building and a fleet of Teslas in cash if I wanted to. 3 hours later, I made sure his fake and flashy life went up in absolute flames. I am Nia, 32 years old, and somehow still recovering from the sheer audacity of the man I married. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to an arrogant partner or toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in a hard-working family taught me the value of quiet strength and independence. But inside my marriage to Marcus, emotional coldness and financial manipulation permeated every single corner of our lives. The air in the maternity ward was freezing that morning, smelling of strong antiseptics and bleach. My body was completely exhausted and trembling. I had just survived a grueling and complicated labor to deliver our first child, a beautiful baby girl, who was currently sleeping peacefully against my chest. I looked up toward the foot of the bed, expecting to see tears of joy in my husband's eyes. I expected the overwhelming warmth of a new family forming. I expected him to hold my hand and tell me how proud he was. Instead, Marcus was pacing aggressively near the window, swiping furiously on his phone with his face twisted in deep annoyance. Marcus is 34 years old, a mid-level financial manager who cares infinitely more about his image and his country club status than his actual bank account. For the last 6 months, he had been obsessing over his new electric car. He financed it, of course, pushing his personal credit to the absolute limit just to get the custom white leather interior so he could flex on his fraternity brothers at the local golf course. During my entire labor, he was completely distracted. While I was pushing and crying in pain, he was complaining loudly to the nurses about the hospital parking garage and how the valet might scratch his expensive rims. I shifted slightly in the uncomfortable hospital bed, wincing from the sharp pain in my lower back. Marcus finally looked up from his screen, but his eyes did not land on our beautiful daughter. They landed on a small speck of iodine and water on my hospital gown. He physically recoiled, taking a deliberate step back toward the door as if my postpartum state was a highly contagious disease. "Are you almost ready to be discharged, Naya?" he asked, his tone flat and heavily impatient. "I have a tea time with the guys in 2 hours to celebrate becoming a father. I cannot be late." They already booked the VIP lounge and paid for the expensive cigars. I stared at him, trying to process the sheer arrogance of his words. "Marcus," I replied, my voice shaking slightly from fatigue. "I just pushed a human being out of my body less than 5 hours ago. I can barely stand up, let alone walk out of here right now." At that exact moment, the heavy wooden door pushed open and my mother-in-law Vivian walked in. Vivian is a woman in her late 60s who wears far too much heavy perfume and judges anyone who does not meet her strict and superficial standards of high society. She prides herself on projecting an image of the black elite in Atlanta, even though her lifestyle is funded entirely by mounting credit card debt. She took one look at me resting in the hospital bed and sighed deeply, treating my physical recovery as a massive personal inconvenience to her day. "Oh, please, Nia," Vivian said, crossing her arms tightly across her chest, her gold bracelets clinking loudly. "Our women are strong. We give birth and get right back to handling our business." When I had Marcus, I was cooking a full roast dinner for my husband by 5 o'clock that same evening. "You are acting completely helpless. Marcus works incredibly hard to provide a luxury roof over your head. The least you can do is let him go blow off some steam with his friends. You are being incredibly selfish right now." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood, doing everything in my power to keep from screaming. Marcus stepped closer to the side of the bed, reaching into his perfectly tailored suit jacket. For a brief and foolish second, I thought he was reaching for a small gift. Maybe a necklace. Maybe just his phone to finally take a picture of his new family to show off to his friends. Instead, he pulled out a folded $20 bill and tossed it onto the plastic meal tray next to my bed. "Listen," Marcus said, glancing nervously at the door while adjusting his designer watch. "I parked in the visitor structure, but I am going to head straight to the club from here. You can call an Uber, but honestly, those drivers are careless and the surge pricing right now is ridiculous. Just take the city bus. The stop is right outside the main entrance. It drops you exactly 2 blocks from our building. Take the bus." I repeated, my voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "With a newborn baby, 3 hours after giving birth." Marcus rolled his eyes and sighed heavily, as if I was the most unreasonable person on earth. "Come on, Nia, do not be dramatic. I just got the white leather interior conditioned yesterday. It is spotless and pristine. I am not risking that car smelling like medical supplies, baby formula, or whatever else is going on here. It is just a quick bus ride. You will be completely fine." Vivian nodded in enthusiastic agreement, completely unbothered by her son's horrific and cruel behavior. "Exactly," she chimed in, adjusting her fake designer handbag. "You need to start walking anyway to lose that stubborn baby weight. Do not be so spoiled and demanding, Nia. We will see you at home later tonight. Make sure you have something prepared for dinner before we get back." I looked down at my daughter. She was so tiny, so perfect, and completely unaware of the toxic and cruel environment she had just been born into. Then I looked back at Marcus. He was already typing on his phone again, ignoring my existence entirely. "Okay," I said softly, reaching out and picking up the $20 bill from the tray. "I will find my own way home. You go have fun." "You?" Marcus smiled, his shoulders dropping in relief. "Good. See, that is the cooperative wife I need. I will leave the hospital bassinet right here. You can figure out how to carry it to the bus stop. Bye, babe." Without so much as kissing his daughter's forehead, Marcus turned on his heel and walked out of the room. Vivian lingered for a second, giving me a cold and dismissive once-over before following her son out the door. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, leaving me totally alone in the quiet hum of the hospital machinery. I stared at the closed door for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the fading sound of my mother-in-law's heels clicking down the hallway. I needed to make absolutely sure they were completely gone. Once the hospital corridor fell totally silent, I took a deep breath. The physical exhaustion that had weighed down my bones just moments ago seemed to instantly evaporate. The timid, submissive expression I had worn for the past 3 years vanished from my face like a discarded mask. I did not shed a single tear. There was no heartbreak left in my chest. There was no grief over a shattered marriage. There was only a cold, calculating clarity taking over my mind. I reached over to the plastic hospital tray and picked up the crumpled $20 bill Marcus had thrown at me. I smoothed it out between my fingers, staring at the green ink. This worthless piece of paper was his final offering to me and our newborn daughter. It was the exact numerical price he placed on our value in his life. I folded the bill neatly and tucked it deep into the pocket of my hospital bag. I would keep it forever. I would frame it in my office as a permanent reminder of the exact moment my empathy for him officially died. With my free hand, I reached for my cell phone resting on the bedside table. I bypassed the family group chats where Vivian was already posting fake updates about her joy of being a grandmother. I ignored the notifications from Marcus's friends, congratulating him on a baby he did not even want to look at. Instead, I opened my encrypted contact list and dialed a secure number I had kept hidden since the very day we got married. The line rang twice before a deep, highly professional voice answered. "Good morning, Madam CEO. I trust the delivery was successful and without complications." It was a baby girl, Sterling. I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Both of us are perfectly healthy, but the grace period is officially over. The social experiment has concluded." "Understood," Sterling said. His tone shifted instantly from polite pleasantries to aggressive corporate strategy. "The legal team has been on standby since you went into labor." What are your exact orders? Freeze everything I commanded, staring blankly at the sterile hospital wall. Start pulling the net. Every single financial trap we quietly set up over the last 12 months needs to be triggered immediately. I could hear the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard on Sterling's end of the line. I want the joint bank accounts locked down within the next 5 minutes, I continued. Marcus genuinely thinks he is the primary account holder because his name is stamped on the physical platinum debit card. He has absolutely no idea those accounts are directly linked to a shadow trust that is completely controlled by my holding company. Drain the liquid assets back into the primary corporate account. Leave him with exactly $0 and 0 cents. I do not want him to be able to buy a single pack of gum. Consider it done. Sterling replied, his voice sharp and efficient. The banking institutions will flag all of his personal and joint cards for insufficient funds across the board. The freeze will take effect in exactly 4 minutes. What about the country club membership? I smiled a sharp, humorless smile that did not reach my eyes. Marcus was currently heading straight to the elite Oak Creek Country Club to smoke premium cigars and drink top-shelf whiskey with his arrogant fraternity brothers. He loved that club more than anything in the world because being seen there made him feel incredibly powerful and important. Call the club's financial director right now, I instructed. Remind him that my venture capital firm quietly acquired the commercial land Oak Creek sits on during the last fiscal quarter. Tell them to terminate Marcus's membership immediately due to non-payment of his annual dues. I want his access revoked while he is standing right in the middle of the VIP lounge, surrounded by his peers. Make his removal as public and humiliating as legally possible. Tell security to escort him out through the main lobby. Sterling chuckled softly, a dark sound that meant someone was about to lose everything they held dear. It will be a spectacular scene, Nia. The board of directors there does not tolerate financial embarrassment from its members. What about the Tesla? The Tesla, I said, looking down at my sleeping daughter who was completely oblivious to the massive empire her mother actually commanded. Marcus loved that car more than his own flesh and blood. He thought he was a financial genius putting the loan entirely under his name to build his personal credit profile. But he was far too arrogant to ever read the fine print of his financing agreement. Contact the auto lender, I told Sterling. Since my equity firm owns the majority shares in the parent company that underwrites those specific luxury auto loans, you have the full authority to call in the debt. He missed 2 payments late last year, and we offered him an administrative grace period. Revoke that grace period right now. Issue an immediate repossession order. I want a heavy-duty tow truck pulling up to that country club before he even finishes his first expensive drink. Sterling typed furiously, confirming each devastating blow as I spoke. Bank accounts frozen, club membership permanently terminated, vehicle repossession ordered and dispatched. Is there anything else, Nia? Yes, I said, my voice dropping an octave lower. Call my executive assistant. Tell her to bring the armored black SUV to the hospital's private rear exit in exactly 20 minutes. Bring the elite postpartum nursing staff I hired from the private clinic. I am not taking a city bus, and I am certainly not going back to that fake, miserable life I was living. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The trap was successfully sprung. For years, I had willingly played the role of the quiet, supportive wife who made a modest salary working a remote tech job. I let Marcus puff out his chest and pretend to be a titan of industry. I let Vivian disrespect my family background and treat me like a lucky peasant who had married out of her league. I endured all of it because I needed to know if they were capable of genuine love and loyalty when there was no obvious money or power to be gained. They failed the ultimate test. And in my world, failure came with a catastrophic penalty. I gently shifted my newborn daughter in my arms, kissing her warm, delicate forehead. You will never have to beg for a ride home, my sweet girl, I whispered to her. You will never have to accept disrespectful scraps from a man who thinks he owns you. We are going to build a beautiful empire together, and today we start by burning his entire fake world right to the ground. I pressed the red call button for the nurse. It was finally time to leave this sterile room. The meek, submissive version of Nia was completely dead and buried right here in this hospital bed. The woman walking out of these doors was the chief executive of an $80 million enterprise, and I was about to teach my husband a brutal masterclass in pain. Within 5 minutes of pressing that red button, the standard hospital staff was completely replaced by my private medical team. Two highly trained postpartum nurses dressed in crisp navy blue scrubs walked into the room. They did not ask questions. They immediately began packing my overnight bag and checking my vitals with quiet precision. The floor charge nurse, a woman who had previously ignored me while Marcus was complaining about his car, now stood nervously in the doorway. She apologized profusely for any inconvenience and offered me a wheelchair. I declined. I wanted to walk out of that building on my own 2 feet. I carried my daughter in my arms, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket my assistant had sent ahead of time. We bypassed the crowded main lobby and took the secured freight elevator down to the private loading dock. The heavy metal doors slid open to the humid morning air. I looked toward the main street where Marcus had told me to catch the city bus. There was a small crowd of tired people standing under a rusted metal overhang waiting for public transit. That was the life my husband thought I deserved. Instead, a massive matte black bulletproof Cadillac Escalade glided silently around the corner and pulled to a stop right in front of me. The vehicle was custom-built, an absolute fortress on wheels that commanded immediate respect. My private chauffeur, David, stepped out wearing a tailored dark suit. He quickly opened the heavy armored passenger door and offered me a respectful nod. "Welcome back, Madam CEO," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Congratulations on the new addition to the family." "Thank you, David," I replied, stepping into the climate-controlled sanctuary of the SUV. The interior smelled of rich mahogany and premium leather, a stark and beautiful contrast to the sterile hospital room I had just left. Sitting across from me in the plush rear cabin were two of the most important people in my professional life. My executive assistant, Simone, sat holding a secure tablet. Next to her was Sterling, my lead corporate attorney. Sterling was a sharp, impeccably dressed man who had helped me build my health technology empire from the ground up. He possessed a legal mind so ruthless that rival venture capitalists actively feared him. Simone immediately handed me a bottle of cold-pressed green juice and took my hospital bag. The private nurses settled into the third row of the spacious vehicle, ensuring my daughter was perfectly secured in her state-of-the-art car seat. David closed the heavy armored door, sealing us inside the soundproof cabin. As the SUV pulled away from the hospital, leaving the rusted bus stop far behind, the tinted privacy divider rolled up. We were entirely cut off from the outside world. "It is time to go to work," I said, taking a sip of the cold juice. Sterling did not waste a single second. He leaned forward and handed me a thick, leather-bound portfolio filled with heavily redacted financial documents. "I have the executable orders right here, Nia," he said, tapping the top page. "These are the immediate asset reclamation directives. As soon as you sign them, the banking institutions will initiate a hard freeze on every account tied to Marcus's Social Security number." I opened the portfolio and looked at the first document. It was the joint savings account statement. For the past 3 years, Marcus truly believed he was the primary provider of our household. He bragged to his fraternity brothers about his mid-level salary and his ability to take care of his wife. He loved swiping his platinum debit card and pretending he was a self-made millionaire. But the reality was a carefully constructed illusion. When we first got married, I quietly set up a blind trust through one of my shell companies. Every month, that trust automatically deposited tens of thousands of dollars into our joint accounts, disguising the transfers as corporate dividends from his firm. I essentially funded his entire fake lifestyle. I paid for his expensive golf clubs. I paid for the designer suits he wore to impress his friends. I even paid the exorbitant down payment on his precious white Tesla. I let him play the role of the big boss while I secretly pulled every single string behind the curtain. He wanted to throw $20 at me and tell me to ride the bus. Now I was going to take back every single penny I ever gave him. I took the heavy gold fountain pen Sterling offered me. I flipped to the signature page of the joint account freeze order. By signing this document, I was legally clawing back the funds, citing a breach of fiduciary trust embedded in the fine print of our marital agreement. Marcus never read the fine print. He was always too arrogant to believe a woman could outsmart him on paper. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, deliberate stroke. "Account frozen," I said, handing the page to Simone, who immediately scanned it into the encrypted corporate server. Sterling handed me the next document. "This is the capital withdrawal order for his primary checking account," he explained. "Since the funds originated from your holding company, we are classifying this as an immediate return of investment capital. His available balance will drop to zero. Any pending transactions will bounce." I thought about the VIP lounge at the Oak Creek Country Club. I thought about Marcus standing at the bar right now, ordering expensive imported cigars and top-shelf liquor for his friends. I imagined the exact look on his face when the bartender handed his black card back to him, declined. The thought brought a genuine smile to my face for the first time all day. I signed the second document without a moment of hesitation. "Execute the withdrawal I ordered. Make sure the bank flags the account for suspicious activity, just to lock it down even tighter. I do not want him to be able to access a single dime." Simone tapped her tablet rapidly. "The banking algorithms are processing the requests now, Nia. The joint savings account has been successfully drained and locked. The primary checking account is currently showing a negative balance due to the immediate capital clawback. He is officially cut off." I leaned back against the plush leather seat and looked over at my daughter. She was sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the massive shift in power happening around her. I gently reached out and stroked her soft cheek. I was doing all of this for her. I refused to raise a young black girl in a household where she would be taught to shrink herself for the comfort of a weak, insecure man. I refused to let her grow up watching her mother be treated like a second-class citizen by a man who was secretly living off her wealth. Sterling cleared his throat, pulling my attention back to the portfolio. "We have one more piece of business regarding the immediate financial freeze," he said, sliding a formal legal notice across the table. "This is the official eviction notice for the penthouse apartment." I looked down at the document. Marcus loved that penthouse. It was located in one of the most exclusive high-rise buildings in downtown Atlanta. He loved inviting his friends over to look out at the city skyline, bragging about his real estate acumen. He constantly reminded me that he was the man of the house, and that he provided the luxury roof over my head. My mother-in-law Vivian also loved to rub it in my face, claiming I was lucky her son allowed me to live in such a beautiful home. What neither of them knew was that I owned the entire building. My commercial real estate division purchased the property 2 years ago. I set up a secondary management company to act as the landlord, and I allowed Marcus to sign the lease as the primary tenant so his ego would remain intact. I even subsidized the monthly rent through another blind trust so he could actually afford to live there. He was essentially renting my property with my own money while telling me to be grateful. "Since you are the sole owner of the management firm," Sterling continued, "you have the right to terminate his month-to-month tenancy at your discretion. However, because he technically forged your signature on a secondary loan application last month, we can categorize this as an emergency eviction due to criminal financial liability. The locks can be changed today." I took the pen and signed the eviction notice with a feeling of absolute triumph. "Change the locks," I instructed, my voice cold and unwavering. "Have the building security team pack up all of his cheap designer clothes and leave them in garbage bags down in the basement loading dock. If Vivian tries to enter the building using her spare key card, deactivate it. I want them completely locked out in the cold." Simone processed the final document and looked up at me with a fierce smile. "Everything is locked and loaded, Madam CEO. The trap is fully set." I looked out the tinted window as the Escalade merged onto the highway heading toward my private estate. The submissive wife who took orders and accepted $20 bills was gone forever. The queen had finally taken her place on the throne and the execution was about to begin. The tires of the Escalade hummed smoothly against the asphalt as we left the hospital district behind. Sterling set the asset reclamation portfolio aside and pulled out a sleek silver laptop. He adjusted his glasses, looking over the screen with a deeply satisfied expression. "The board of directors sends their warmest congratulations on the safe delivery of your daughter Nia," he said. They also wanted me to personally inform you that the final paperwork for the Apex Health Tech merger cleared early this morning. The ink is completely dry. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the sprawling Atlanta skyline passing by the tinted window, and the final valuation I asked. $1.2 billion, Sterling replied, closing the laptop with a sharp snap. Your primary health technology enterprise has officially crossed the billion-dollar threshold. The $80 million cash acquisition of your secondary startup last quarter was just the appetizer. You are now officially one of the wealthiest Black women in the entire tech industry. Simone handed me a fresh towel and smiled brightly. Not bad for a woman whose husband thinks she does basic data entry for $50,000 a year. She added, her tone dripping with well-deserved sarcasm. I let out a harsh laugh. The irony of my reality compared to Marcus's delusion was staggering. For the past 3 years, I had successfully orchestrated the greatest illusion of my entire life. I built a medical software platform from a tiny dorm room concept into a massive corporate juggernaut that revolutionized digital patient care across the country. I commanded boardrooms. I negotiated with ruthless venture capitalists. I owned prime commercial real estate across 3 states. Yet every single evening, I would come home to our apartment, put on a faded pair of sweatpants, and listen to Marcus deliver arrogant lectures about how hard the real business world was. I still find it remarkably impressive that you managed to keep a billion-dollar empire completely hidden from a man who shares your bed, Sterling noted, leaning back in his leather seat. Most people would have slipped up. A misplaced bank statement, a recognized face at a corporate dinner, a sudden desire to buy something luxurious. It was not difficult, Sterling, I replied, my voice hardening. Marcus only looks at things that directly feed his own ego. He never asked about my day because he genuinely believed my work was beneath his notice. When I set up my home office, I made sure to leave fake pay stubs on the kitchen counter. I complained about a fictional micromanaging boss. I deliberately drove a 5-year-old used sedan and shopped at discount stores. He loved every second of it. It made him feel like the undisputed king of the castle. But why go to such extreme lengths? Simone asked softly. You were already wildly successful when you two reconnected. Why put yourself through years of playing small and acting submissive? I looked down at my sleeping daughter, adjusting the soft cashmere blanket around her tiny shoulders. Because I knew exactly who Marcus was before he ever put on those cheap tailored suits, I explained. We met back when we were students in the Atlanta University Center. I was at Spelman College grinding through double majors and working 2 part-time jobs. He was across the street at Morehouse College, playing the role of the charismatic, untouchable fraternity boy. I paused, letting the bitter memories flood back into my mind. He was a clout chaser even back then. He desperately wanted to be seen as wealthy and important, but he never wanted to put in the actual hard work. I watched him date a brilliant pre-med student named Keisha. He manipulated her into taking out $30,000 in private student loans, claiming he needed the money to launch a groundbreaking party promotion business. Sterling raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. The business never launched. Exactly, I said. He spent her loan money on designer clothes, VIP tables at nightclubs, and leasing a luxury car so he could look like a boss on campus. When the money ran out, he dumped Keisha and left her drowning in crippling debt that she is probably still paying off today. He ruined her credit and her mental health without a single ounce of remorse. I never forgot what he did to her. I never forgot how easily he could look a Black woman in the eyes and drain her dry just to inflate his own fragile ego. When Marcus and I crossed paths again at a networking event years later, he fed me a massive lie about how much he had matured. He claimed he was a changed man, a serious financial manager who valued loyalty and family above all else. I wanted to believe him. A foolish, naive part of me hoped that people could actually grow up and evolve. But I was not about to risk the empire I had bled to build on a blind hope. So you created the ultimate test, Sterling stated, nodding in profound understanding. I created the ultimate test, I confirmed. I presented myself as a modest, quiet woman with a mediocre tech job and no real assets. I wanted to see if he loved me for my character, or if he just saw me as a convenient subordinate he could emotionally and financially dominate. I needed to know what he would do when he thought he held all the power. Would he protect me or would he exploit me? He exploited you, Simone said, her voice laced with pure disgust. He took your heavily subsidized money to fund his flashy lifestyle while treating you like an absolute burden. He proved that he is the exact same parasite he was 15 years ago. I said, my tone turning ice cold. But this time, he picked the wrong woman to bleed. Back then, he was just playing with college tuition and vulnerable young girls. Today, he looked at his exhausted wife holding his newborn child and threw a $20 bill at her so he could keep his car seats clean. Sterling pulled a thick, encrypted tablet from his briefcase. Well, his parasitic days are officially over. Your corporate shield is completely impenetrable. Because you legally structured the marriage under the jurisdiction of a holding company trust, Marcus has absolutely zero claim to your actual wealth. He signed a prenuptial agreement, disguised as a standard joint liability waiver, on the lease of the penthouse. He did not read a single page. He just wanted the keys to the luxury apartment so he could brag to his friends. He was too blinded by the shiny objects to see the trap, I murmured. Precisely, Sterling agreed. In the eyes of the law, he is leaving this marriage with exactly what he brought into it. Nothing. In fact, considering the aggressive leverage he took out for that Tesla and his country club dues, he is leaving with a massive mountain of debt. I turned my gaze away from the documents and looked out the window again. The city was fully awake now, the morning sun reflecting off the massive glass skyscrapers downtown. Some of those buildings belonged to me. I had built a legacy that would ensure my daughter never had to depend on anyone for a ride home. Marcus thought he was the ultimate prize, the successful man who was doing me a massive favor by letting me be his wife. He was about to learn that he was nothing more than a temporary, heavily monitored intern in my life, and his internship was officially terminated. My phone suddenly buzzed in the cup holder next to me, breaking the heavy silence in the cabin. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed a name that instantly made my blood boil all over again. It was Preston, Marcus's arrogant, condescending white brother-in-law, the man who constantly talked down to me at family dinners and treated my entire existence as an amusing joke. I picked up the phone without answering, reading the new text message that had just illuminated the screen. "What does the parasite's partner in crime want?" Simone asked, noticing the sharp change in my expression. I read the text message out loud, my voice dangerously calm. "Heard you got put on a bus. Marcus is buying out the VIP room out of his own pocket. You should learn how to keep your husband happy, Nia. Maybe then he would treat you better." Sterling let out a low, disgusted whistle. The sheer audacity of that man. I locked the phone screen and tossed it back into the cup holder. The white privilege and unearned arrogance practically radiated through the text. Preston fancied himself a Wall Street genius running a boutique private equity fund that catered to the local elite. He loved to give me unsolicited financial advice, telling me I needed to learn how money really worked. Sterling. I said, my eyes narrowing as I formulated the next phase of the execution. I believe it is time we teach Preston a lesson about how money really works. Sterling leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "What exactly did Preston say to you, Nia?" I handed the phone across the plush leather console so Sterling and Simone could read the message for themselves. Preston had always been a master of the backhanded compliment and the subtle insult. He was a mediocre white man who had married my sister-in-law Chloe and instantly appointed himself the financial patriarch of our entire extended family. He ran a boutique investment firm in Midtown Atlanta and spent every family gathering handing out unsolicited advice. He loved to corner me in the kitchen while I was pouring a drink and explain the stock market to me using small, simple words as if my brain could not possibly comprehend basic mathematics. "He thinks he is untouchable," I said, watching Sterling's eyes scan the text message. "He thinks because he wears a fleece vest and uses words like blockchain and algorithmic trading that nobody in our family is smart enough to see right through his absolute garbage of a business model." Sterling handed the phone back with a look of utter disgust. The audacity of texting a woman who just gave birth to mock her about taking a bus. He is begging for a swift destruction. "And he is going to get it," I replied, leaning back and crossing my legs. Simone pulled up the encrypted file labeled Icarus from the cloud server. Simone tapped her screen rapidly, and within seconds a massive folder appeared on her tablet. I had my forensic accounting team quietly look into Preston's firm about 8 months ago, I explained to Sterling. At first, I just wanted to know how a guy who could barely do basic division in his head was managing a high-yield private equity fund. I thought maybe he was just overcharging his clients on management fees. But what my team found was so much worse. It is a classic Ponzi scheme, Simone said, reading the executive summary aloud. He is promising a guaranteed 12% quarterly return to his investors. But there is no actual trading portfolio. There are no corporate bonds. There is no real estate trust. He is simply taking the capital from new investors to pay the fictional dividends of the old investors. And he is skimming roughly 30% off the top to fund his personal lifestyle. I nodded, looking out the window as we cruised down the highway. He targeted affluent Black professionals in our community, doctors, lawyers, mid-level corporate managers like Marcus, people who had a little bit of disposable income and a lot of desire to build generational wealth. Preston used Chloe and Marcus to vouch for him, opening the door to their country club network. He has been draining our community dry while smiling in our faces and drinking our wine at Thanksgiving. Sterling took off his glasses and cleaned them with a silk handkerchief. Financial fraud of that magnitude carries mandatory federal prison time, Nia. If we hand this over, he is not just going to lose his business. He is going to lose his freedom. That is exactly the point, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He sent me a text mocking my situation while he is actively stealing from my family and my community. He thinks his privilege gives him an invisible shield. Let us see how well that shield holds up against the federal government. What are your orders? Sterling asked, placing his glasses back on his face and opening his laptop. Send the entire unredacted dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately, I commanded. I want it submitted through the official whistleblower portal. Include all the offshore bank routing numbers we found. Include the wire transfer receipts that prove he has been moving investor funds to a private casino account in the Bahamas. Make sure the documentation is so bulletproof that a first-year law student could secure a conviction. Uploading the files now, Simone set her fingers flying across the digital keyboard. The data packet includes all of his fake prospectus documents and the internal emails where he instructed his assistant to alter the balance sheets. Do not stop with the SEC, I added. Wire fraud crosses state lines, which makes this a federal crime. Send a duplicate encrypted packet to the white-collar crime division of the FBI field office in Atlanta. Flag it as an active and ongoing financial flight risk. Given the amount of money involved, they will not wait around to form an exploratory committee. They will act today. Sterling hit the enter key on his laptop with a loud, decisive click. The files are securely transmitted to both agencies, Madam CEO. The digital footprints are completely untraceable back to you. The anonymous tip will trigger an immediate emergency audit. By this afternoon, his corporate accounts will be frozen by federal mandate. By tomorrow morning, he will likely have agents in windbreakers kicking down the glass doors of his fancy midtown office. I looked down at my phone, which was still resting in the cup holder. Preston was probably sitting at the country club right now, laughing with Marcus slapping him on the back and smoking an imported cigar paid for with stolen money. They were celebrating their perceived dominance. They had no idea that a silent, invisible missile had just been launched directly at their carefully constructed house of cards. You know, Simone said quietly, pouring me another glass of cold green juice. When Preston finds out his fund is frozen, he is going to panic. The first thing a cornered scammer does is try to call in his debts or demand more cash from his closest victims to cover his tracks. I smiled slowly as the pieces of the ultimate trap locked perfectly into place. Exactly. And the closest victim he has right now is Marcus. When Preston's accounts lock up, he is going to demand that Marcus front him cash. And when Marcus tries to access his own accounts, he will find out that he has absolutely nothing left. They are going to drag each other down to the bottom of the ocean. The Escalade turned onto the private winding driveway of my primary estate. The massive iron gates swung open automatically, welcoming the true owner home. I looked at the beautiful, sprawling property that I had purchased in cash, entirely independent of my marriage. My daughter stirred slightly in her sleep, completely safe and fiercely protected. The first phase of my revenge was officially executed. The traps were set. The financial lifelines were cut. The federal authorities were mobilized. Now all I had to do was wait for the dominoes to start falling and listen to the beautiful sound of their arrogant world crashing to the ground. Across town, the atmosphere inside the VIP lounge of the Oak Creek Country Club was completely different from the quiet tension of my armored escalade. Marcus was holding court, holding a crystal glass of top-shelf scotch and basking in the admiration of his peers. The room was filled with the city's black elite. Successful doctors, corporate lawyers, and men who prided themselves on their status and wealth. At the center of it all was my husband wearing a custom-tailored suit that I had secretly paid for acting like he was the absolute king of Atlanta. Sitting directly across from him was Preston sipping a neat bourbon and checking his designer watch. To Marcus, Preston said, raising his glass in a mock toast. A man who truly knows how to manage his household. Tell me again how you handled the hospital departure. Marcus laughed, a deep, arrogant sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. I told her to take the city bus, he bragged, taking a slow drag from a $50 cigar. Women these days want to be pampered too much. You have to set boundaries early. She was whining about being tired, but I told her my new Tesla was not a taxi service. The white leather is pristine. I am not letting hospital smells ruin my investment. A few of the men in the circle chuckled, nodding in agreement. They thought he was a tough, uncompromising alpha male. Marcus leaned back in his plush leather armchair, feeling absolutely invincible. He looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the VIP lounge, which offered a perfect view of the club's circular valet driveway. His prized electric vehicle was parked right in the center, gleaming under the morning sun. It was his ultimate status symbol. But his arrogant smile slowly faded. A massive, rusted, heavy-duty tow truck was backing up the pristine brick driveway right toward his car. The loud reverse warning beeps of the truck pierced the quiet elegance of the country club. Marcus slammed his crystal glass down on the table, spilling expensive scotch over the rim. "What the hell is that idiot doing?" he snapped, standing up so fast his chair almost tipped over. He marched out of the VIP lounge and pushed through the heavy glass doors onto the outdoor terrace. The other men, including Preston, followed closely behind him, holding their drinks and watching with mild curiosity. Marcus stormed down the steps toward the valet stand, waving his arms wildly. "Hey!" he yelled, pointing at the burly tow truck driver who was currently securing thick metal chains around the rear axle of the Tesla. "Stop what you are doing right now. That is my vehicle. You are going to scratch the paint." The driver, a heavy-set man wearing a stained neon vest, did not even flinch. He pulled a clipboard from his belt and looked at the license plate. "Are you Marcus?" he asked loudly, his voice carrying across the entire terrace, where dozens of wealthy club members were now watching. "Yes, I am Marcus, and I demand you take those chains off my property," he yelled, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "I am a VIP member here. I will have you arrested." The driver laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You cannot have anyone arrested, buddy. The bank called in the note. This is a lawful repossession. Your grace period was officially revoked 20 minutes ago. You are in default." Marcus froze. The blood drained completely from his face. He looked up at the terrace where his fraternity brothers and fellow elite professionals were whispering and pointing. "Default," he stammered, lowering his voice to an urgent whisper. "No, no, no. That is a massive clerical error. My wealth manager handles those payments automatically. Look, I can give you cash right now to hold off. Just unhook the car." "I do not take cash," the driver said loudly, completely ignoring Marcus's attempt to keep the situation quiet. "And your account was flagged for insufficient funds across the board. The lender wants the vehicle secured immediately. Now step back before you get hurt." Marcus stood paralyzed in absolute humiliation as the hydraulic lift groaned loudly, hoisting his pristine symbol of wealth into the air. The dirty chains scraped against the expensive rims. He watched helplessly as his beloved car was towed away down the long, oak-lined driveway, disappearing through the front gates. He turned around and walked slowly back up the stairs. His tailored suit suddenly felt entirely too tight. He could feel the burning stares of everyone on the terrace. He forced a tight, awkward smile, trying desperately to salvage his shattered pride. "Unbelievable incompetence," Marcus announced loudly to Preston and the others as they walked back into the VIP lounge. "These massive banking institutions always mess up routing numbers. My assistant is going to get fired today for this oversight. I will have my attorneys sorted out by noon." Preston looked highly amused, swirling the ice in his glass. "Banking errors can be a real headache," he said, his tone laced with patronizing sympathy. "Are you sure your cash flow is steady, Marcus? You know I can always offer you a high-interest bridge loan from my fund if things are tight at home." "I am perfectly fine," Marcus snapped defensively, dropping back into his leather chair. "My cash flow is spectacular. In fact, to prove it, this entire celebration is on me." "Waiter." A young server in a crisp white shirt hurried over to the table. "Yes, sir. Bring me the tab for the entire room," Marcus commanded, waving his hand dismissively. "All the bottles, all the cigars, the room rental fee. Put it all on my personal card." The waiter nodded and returned a moment later with a black leather checkbook presented on a silver tray. The total came to $10,400. Marcus casually pulled his heavy metallic debit card from his wallet and dropped it onto the tray without even glancing at the receipt. He looked around the room, making sure everyone saw his grand gesture. He needed to reestablish his dominance after the towing incident. The waiter walked over to the corner bar and swiped the card through the terminal. Marcus went back to his story, trying to regain the crowd's attention. But 2 minutes later, the waiter returned, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Sir," the waiter whispered, leaning in close to Marcus's ear. "I am incredibly sorry, but the card was declined." Marcus frowned, his heart skipping a panicked beat. He kept his voice low. "That is impossible. It is a premium tier card. Run it again. Push it through manually." "I already tried 3 times, sir," the waiter replied. "The terminal is giving me a hard decline code. It says the account is frozen." Marcus felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He quickly pulled out 2 more credit cards and shoved them at the waiter. "Here, try these. There must be a fraud alert on the first one because of the amount. Just split the bill across these 2. The waiter took the cards and walked back to the machine. This time Preston and the rest of the table were watching in complete silence. The ambient chatter in the room had completely died down. Everyone heard the loud, angry beep of the credit card machine. It beeped again, and then a 3rd time. The club's general manager, a stern older man, walked into the VIP lounge holding a printed piece of paper. He bypassed the waiter and walked directly up to Marcus's table. "Mr. Marcus," the manager said, his voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent room. "All of your payment methods have been rejected for insufficient funds. Furthermore, I have just received a direct call from our corporate financial director." Marcus swallowed hard, his hands visibly shaking. "Look, I can explain," he started. The manager did not let him finish. "Your membership at Oak Creek Country Club has been permanently and immediately terminated due to non-payment of your annual dues. Your financial standing is no longer welcome here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises right this second. If you cannot settle this $10,000 bill before you walk out those doors, we will be calling the police to report theft of services." The room erupted in loud gasps and shocked whispers. The fraternity brothers who were just praising him a minute ago now looked at him with sheer disgust and pity. Preston just stared at him with wide, shocked eyes. Marcus was completely exposed. He had no car, he had no money, he was being thrown out of the most exclusive club in the city like a common criminal. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out his cell phone. He had only one lifeline left. He had to call his wife. While I was sitting comfortably in the back of my armored Escalade, Marcus was experiencing the absolute worst 10 minutes of his entire life. He pushed through the heavy oak doors of the country club restroom and locked himself inside the largest handicap stall. He leaned against the cold Italian marble wall, gasping for air, as if he had just run a marathon. His expensive, tailored suit was completely soaked in nervous sweat. His hands were shaking so violently that he actually dropped his cell phone onto the tile floor before hastily snatching it back up. He could hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the VIP lounge down the hall, and he was absolutely convinced they were laughing at him. He stared at his phone screen. His bank app was flashing a bright red error message stating that his accounts were completely locked and his balances were negative. He had no cash in his wallet. His $10,000 bill was sitting unpaid on a silver tray. His pristine white Tesla was currently being dragged down the highway by a rusted tow truck. He had hit absolute rock bottom in front of the exact people he spent his entire life trying to impress. Desperation completely overrode his massive ego. He dialed my number. Inside the Escalade, my phone began to vibrate in the cup holder. The caller ID flashed my husband's name. I looked at Sterling and Simone, who both stopped what they were doing and smiled. I picked up the phone and pressed the speaker button, resting the device on the polished mahogany console so everyone in the cabin could hear his humiliating downfall. "Hello?" I answered, my voice the perfect picture of calm and quiet obedience. "Nia," he practically screamed into the phone. His voice was shrill, echoing loudly off the bathroom tiles. "Listen to me very carefully. I need you to drop whatever you are doing right this second. Call an Uber or a cab or whatever and go straight to the downtown bank branch." I took a slow sip of my green juice. "Go to the bank for what, Marcus? I just had a baby. I'm still trying to figure out how to get myself and our daughter home on the city bus, remember?" "Do not start with the complaining right now, Nia." He snapped, his panic making him incredibly vicious. "This is a massive emergency. There is a huge glitch in the banking system. My corporate accounts are temporarily frozen because of a security flag. It is a total misunderstanding, but the general manager here is throwing a massive fit over the VIP bill. They towed my car by mistake. I am stuck here, and I need cash right now to clear my tab and pay the impound fee before they close for the weekend." I let a few seconds of dead silence pass. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. "I do not understand," I said, keeping my tone completely flat. "What do you want me to do about a banking glitch, Marcus? I am just a low-level employee. I do not have access to your corporate funds." "I am not asking for my corporate funds," he yelled, his breathing heavy and ragged. "I need your money. I need you to go to the teller and withdraw your little savings account. Every single penny of it. It should be around $12,000, right? Withdraw it in cash and bring it to the club immediately. I will pay you back on Monday when the bank fixes my accounts. I will even give you a little extra for your trouble. Just get here now." Sterling covered his mouth to stop himself from laughing out loud. Simone rolled her eyes in sheer disgust at his condescending tone. Even in his most desperate moment, begging his wife to save him from public ruin, he still had to belittle my fictional savings account. He still had to treat me like a foolish child he could easily command. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping the act and turning dangerously cold. "I cannot bring you $12,000. Why not?" he demanded, pounding his fist against the marble wall of the bathroom stall. "Stop being selfish, Nia. You are my wife. You are supposed to support me. Get off your lazy behind and go to the bank. I used the $20 bill you gave me to buy premium diapers from the hospital pharmacy." I replied clearly and slowly. "That is the only money I have on me." "I am not talking about the $20, he screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "I am talking about your personal savings account, the emergency fund you keep bragging about. Go to the bank and withdraw the $12,000 right now." "What savings, Marcus?" I asked. "Your savings account, Nia. The one tied to your debit card." I leaned forward, staring at the phone sitting on the console. "Did you forget that you secretly drained it all last month?" I asked. The line went completely dead silent. The only sound was Marcus's heavy, ragged breathing. He was completely paralyzed. I continued speaking, my voice slicing through his silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "You thought I was too terrible at basic math to notice, did you not? You thought because I trusted you to manage our household finances, I would never actually look at the digital statements. You transferred the money out in small daily increments of $500, hoping it would fly under the radar. By the 15th of the month, you had completely emptied my entire emergency fund. You stole every single dime I had set aside for our daughter's future. Nia, I can explain, he stammered, his alpha male persona instantly shattering into a million pathetic pieces. That was not stealing. I was just moving the money around to maximize our interest yield. I was trying to build wealth for our family. You do not understand how these high-yield investments work. I understand perfectly, I replied. I understand that you took $12,000 from a woman who was 8 months pregnant and you handed it directly to Preston so you could buy into his fraudulent private equity fund. You threw my money into a black hole because you wanted to look like a big-shot investor at the country club. And now you are hiding in a bathroom stall with a declined credit card and no car begging me for the exact same money you already stole. Please, Nia. His voice broke completely, reducing him to a whimpering mess. The manager is threatening to call the police. The guys are out there waiting for me to pay. Preston is out there. If I walk out of this bathroom without settling the bill, they are going to arrest me for theft of services. I will be ruined. My reputation will be destroyed. Please, you have to call someone. You have to borrow the money from your family. Just save me this one time and I swear I will never ask for anything ever again. The sheer cowardice radiating from the phone was absolutely intoxicating. The man who had tossed a $20 bill at me and told me to take the bus was now begging on his hands and knees for salvation. But the execution was not over yet. He still had more to confess. He still had to tell me about the ultimate betrayal before I brought the hammer completely down. You want me to borrow money to save your reputation? I asked softly. Why do you need me to borrow money, Marcus? We own a beautiful luxury penthouse right in the heart of the city. If you are a financial genius, why do you not just take out a secondary line of credit against the equity in our home? The silence that followed was even heavier and more terrifying than the last one. I could practically hear his heart pounding out of his chest. I knew exactly what he had done, but I needed him to say the words out loud. I needed him to admit his greatest crime on a recorded line with my lead corporate attorney sitting right across from me. Marcus, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet luxury of the Escalade. Tell me why you cannot use the house to pay your debts. Tell me exactly what you did. I could hear Marcus swallow hard over the speaker. The sound was thick and dry, echoing loudly off the marble walls of the bathroom stall. He did not want to answer my question about the house. He actively dodged it, scrambling desperately to deflect the conversation back to the missing cash. Look, Nia, leave the house out of this for a second, he stammered, his voice pitching much higher than usual. You do not understand how high-level alternative investments work. Preston gave me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was a completely closed door, offering strictly for the platinum-tier investors of his private equity fund. I needed $50,000 in liquid cash just to buy in. I already put in $30,000 from my own corporate performance bonus, but I was short. I needed your $12,000 to bridge the gap and secure our position. Your corporate performance bonus? I repeated, silently mouthing the absolute lie to Sterling, who was suppressing a massive grin. There was no corporate bonus. That $30,000 was the exact amount I had secretly deposited into his primary checking account from my holding company last quarter. He was literally bragging about investing my own money while claiming he was the breadwinner. And you gave it all to Preston, I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion or sympathy. You handed over the emergency fund I spent 2 years saving for our baby, so you could play Wall Street with your arrogant scammer of a brother-in-law. It was a guaranteed 12% quarterly return, he shouted defensively, completely missing the point. Preston showed me the proprietary spreadsheets, Nia. I was trying to double our net worth in 60 days. I was going to use the massive profits to pay off the Tesla outright and secure a lifetime executive membership at the country club. I was doing this for us. I was trying to build generational wealth for our daughter. Suddenly his tone shifted entirely. The panicked desperation morphed rapidly into a toxic defensive anger. This was classic Marcus. Whenever he was cornered and forced to face his own catastrophic failures, he aggressively attacked the nearest target. He was a textbook narcissist, and right now his fragile ego was demanding a scapegoat. You know what? He spat, his voice turning vicious and cruel. This is actually your fault. My fault, I asked, raising an eyebrow at Simone, who was staring at the phone in absolute disbelief. Yes, your fault, he growled. If you actually had a real career instead of a mediocre data entry job, we would not be in this miserable position. If you brought in a six-figure salary, like the other wives in my elite circle, I would not have to stress myself out making these aggressive investments. Do you have any idea how much pressure I am under to provide for this family single-handedly? I am the one carrying the massive financial weight on my shoulders. I am the one out here networking and building crucial connections with the top-tier earners. You just sit in your little home office, clicking a mouse and complaining about being tired. He was completely unhinged now. His narcissistic rage was blinding him to the immediate reality of his situation. He was locked in a public restroom stall with $0 to his name, hiding from a waiter, and screaming at the woman he genuinely thought was his financial inferior. You have absolutely zero ambition, Nia. He continued, his words dripping with pure venom. You do not know how to hustle. You do not know how to make real money. That is exactly why I have to take the risks. I have to be the visionary of this household, because you are perfectly fine being average and invisible. Look at Preston's wife, Chloe. She brings in actual money. She runs a boutique marketing firm. She understands how to network with wealthy clients. What do? You work from home in faded sweatpants. You do not even try to elevate yourself. I sat back in the plush leather seat of the armored Escalade, letting his toxic words wash over me. I did not interrupt him. I let him dig the hole as deep as humanly possible. You have a poverty mindset, he sneered, breathing heavily into the receiver. You hoard your little $12,000 like it is a massive fortune, because you have never seen real wealth in your entire life. You have a broke mentality, Nia. I am out here trying to break generational curses, and you are mad at me for taking the necessary initiative. I had to take control of our finances because you are too scared to make big moves. You think saving a few $100s a month is going to make us rich. You do not understand leveraging capital. You do not understand risk tolerance. I had to be the man of the house and make the hard executive decisions because you are completely incapable of seeing the bigger picture. If you actually knew how to generate wealth, I would not have had to touch your stupid little savings account in the first place. You forced my hand. The absolute audacity of this man was breathtaking. A poverty mindset, a broke mentality. He was speaking to a woman who had single-handedly negotiated an $80 million cash acquisition just last quarter. I had offshore accounts generating more daily interest yield than he had made in his entire miserable career. I had ruthless venture capitalists flying into Atlanta on private jets just to ask for 10 minutes of my time. But to Marcus, I was just a small-minded administrative worker holding him back from his imaginary greatness. I looked at Sterling. My brilliant corporate attorney was shaking his head slowly, absolutely disgusted by the pathetic display of fragile masculinity pouring out of the phone speaker. It was almost poetic. The man who was currently lecturing me about wealth generation was entirely funded by my secret billion-dollar empire. He was wearing designer clothes I bought. He was driving an expensive car I paid for. He was living a luxury life I completely subsidized. And yet he sat there in his delusion, convincing himself that I was the dead weight pulling him down. Are you completely finished, Marcus? I asked quietly when he finally paused to catch his breath. No, I am not finished, he snapped. I need you to understand your role in this mess. You are my wife, and you are supposed to step up when I need you. I am out here trying to secure our future in a corporate world that does not want to see a black man succeed. I have to project an image of absolute power and success. You do not understand the politics of the country club. You do not understand what it takes to sit at the table with men like Preston. They respect money, Nia. They respect power. I had to make that investment to keep my seat at the table. I took another slow sip of my cold-pressed juice. The sheer irony of him trying to impress Preston, a mediocre scammer who was about to be raided by the federal government, was almost too delicious to bear. Well, Marcus, I said, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly calm. It sounds like your seat at the table has been officially revoked. You gave all of our liquid cash to Preston. The bank accounts are frozen solid. The country club just publicly terminated your membership. And the Tesla you tried to pay off with stolen funds has already been towed away down the highway. So I will ask you one more time. I leaned closer to the phone, making sure my next words pierced straight through his pathetic gaslighting and struck the absolute core of his fear. If you are such a visionary financial genius, why do you not just use the luxury penthouse to secure a hard money loan and pay your bar tab? Tell me why our house is off limits, Marcus. Tell me exactly what you did. The silence stretching across the phone line was so absolute that I could hear the faint sound of a dripping faucet in the country club bathroom. Marcus was trapped. He had spent his entire life talking his way out of consequences, relying on his charm and his aggressive manipulation to bulldoze anyone who questioned him. But he could not charm his way out of a negative bank balance, and he certainly could not manipulate the cold hard facts I was demanding. I am waiting, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. You claim to be the undisputed visionary of this family. You claim you have the financial acumen to sit with the elite. So tell me why the visionary cannot leverage his own luxury penthouse to pay a $10,000 bar tab. Because I already did, he blurted out, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. I already leveraged the house, Nia. There is no equity left to pull. I leaned back in my leather seat, letting my eyes meet Sterling's across the cabin. My attorney raised a single perfectly groomed eyebrow, a silent gesture of absolute predatory anticipation. We already knew about the fraudulent loan, of course. My forensic accounting team had flagged the secondary collateral application weeks ago. But having the suspect actively confess to the crime on a recorded line was the ultimate legal victory. What do you mean you already leveraged the house? I asked, feigning utter confusion. We signed a standard residential lease for that penthouse. You told me those documents were just routine liability waivers for the building management. How do you pull equity out of a property we supposedly just rent? Marcus let out a ragged, desperate sigh. He was unraveling, completely losing any remaining grip on his carefully constructed reality. Because I did not just sign a lease, Nia. I went to a private lender, a guy I know from the fraternity who works at a boutique mortgage firm. I told him we were purchasing the penthouse directly from the management company. I used our combined income statements and the fake deed documents I had my buddy draft up to secure a massive collateralized loan against the property. I took out $300,000 in cash against the house. $300,000, I repeated, letting the staggering number hang in the air. And where exactly did that money go, Marcus? I had to maintain our lifestyle, he shouted, his voice echoing frantically. The luxury suits, the country club dues, the down payment on the Tesla. Do you think that lifestyle is cheap? I was floating our entire image on that loan, waiting for Preston's fund to pay out the massive quarterly dividends. When the dividends hit, I was going to pay the private lender back in full. Nobody was ever supposed to know. It was a flawless bridge loan strategy until you refused to give me your savings and the bank locked my accounts. I tapped my manicured fingernails against the mahogany console. Your bridge loan strategy required both of our signatures as co-applicants, Marcus. The private lender would have mandated a joint notarized agreement to issue $300,000 against a primary residence. I never signed a loan document. I never sat in front of a notary. I never authorized you to put a lien on the roof over our heads. For a brief moment, the only sound was Marcus hyperventilating in his bathroom stall. He knew he had crossed a line from which he could never return. He had moved from simple financial infidelity straight into the realm of federal felonies. I signed it for you, he finally whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shame and lingering arrogance. You what? I asked, lowering my voice to a dangerous, deadly pitch. I forged your signature, Nia. He confessed, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a panicked rush. I copied your signature from our marriage certificate and I stamped it on the digital loan applications. I paid a shady notary $2,000 in cash to verify your presence without you actually being there. It was just paperwork. You do not understand how tedious these financial institutions can be. You were always busy working your silly little data entry job and complaining about being tired. I did not want to bother you with the complex financial mechanics. I am the man of the house. I made an executive decision to secure capital for our future. I practically did you a favor by handling all the stressful documentation myself. Simone let out a sharp gasp, completely horrified by his unbelievable delusion. Sterling, however, smiled like a shark that had just smelled fresh blood in the water. He immediately began typing furiously on his laptop, updating the legal brief to include 3 counts of federal wire fraud and identity theft. You committed mortgage fraud, I said, stating the fact plainly. You forged your pregnant wife's signature to steal $300,000, and you spent it all on cigars, luxury cars, and a fraudulent Ponzi scheme. And now you expect me to feel sorry for you because your credit card got declined. Nia, please, you are not listening to me. Marcus pleaded, sobbing openly into the phone. The details do not matter right now. What matters is that the general manager is standing right outside this bathroom stall. I can literally hear him talking to the police dispatcher. If I get arrested for theft of services, they will run a background check. The private lender will find out about the frozen accounts. The entire house of cards will collapse. You have to call your parents. You have to wire me the $10,000 right now. Save me, Nia. I am the father of your child. You cannot let me go to jail. Suddenly, a loud, heavy pounding echoed through the phone speaker. The country club manager was banging on the bathroom stall door. Mr. Marcus, the manager's muffled voice demanded, "The police are pulling into the valet driveway. Step out of the stall immediately or they will break the door down." Nia Marcus screamed, pure terror ripping through his vocal cords. "Please, wire the money. Call the front desk and give them your credit card number. Do it now." I looked down at the sleeping baby in my arms. I looked at the beautiful, sprawling city passing by the tinted windows of my armored Escalade. I thought about the 12 agonizing hours of labor I had just endured, only to be handed a crumpled $20 bill by the man who was currently sobbing on the floor of a public restroom. He had drained my accounts. He had mocked my career. He had forged my name to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had gambled our entire future away just to impress men who were literally calling the police on him right this second. I leaned close to the phone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply let a cold, wicked smile spread across my face. "Mortgaged the house?" I said softly, my voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. "Interesting. Come home, Marcus. There is a surprise waiting for you." I reached out and pressed the red button, disconnecting the call instantly. The cabin of the Escalade fell into a heavy, triumphant silence. The trap had officially snapped shut. Marcus was entirely on his own. The ride back to the penthouse was remarkably peaceful. Once we arrived, David pulled the Escalade into the private underground parking garage of the luxury high-rise. I took the private elevator straight up to the top floor, stepping into the sprawling 6,000-square-foot apartment I had secretly purchased 2 years ago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, bathing the entire living room in warm afternoon sunlight. I settled onto the plush velvet sofa, gently placing my sleeping daughter into her custom bassinet nearby. I did not change into sweatpants. I kept my tailored suit on. Simone and Sterling set up their temporary command center at the massive glass dining table, spreading out the signed financial documents, the eviction notice, and the federal fraud statutes. We did not have to wait long. I knew Marcus would come running back to the very place he had illegally mortgaged the moment he realized he had nowhere else to go. Exactly. 45 minutes after I disconnected his call, the private elevator chimed loudly. The heavy oak double doors of the penthouse did not just open, they burst apart. Marcus stormed into the foyer looking like a man who had just survived a natural disaster. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled and stained with sweat. His tie was pulled loose and his eyes were wild with panic and rage. Following closely behind him was an entire parade of parasites. My mother-in-law Vivian marched in clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Next came my sister-in-law Chloe wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and a deeply offended scowl. And finally bringing up the rear was Preston, who looked furious and incredibly put out by the entire ordeal. "How dare you hang up on me!" Marcus screamed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as he stomped into the center of the living room. I am in the middle of the worst financial crisis of my life, and you just hang up the phone. I was trapped in a public restroom, Nia. I was humiliated in front of the entire country club. I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I simply crossed my legs and looked at him. You seem to be having a wonderful time throwing $20 bills at me this morning, I replied calmly. I figured you could handle a minor banking glitch like the visionary man you claim to be. Marcus turned bright red. You think this is a joke? He yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. They towed my Tesla. They publicly revoked my membership. If Preston had not stepped in and used his personal platinum card to pay the $10,000 tab, the police would have arrested me. I had to ride back here in the back of Preston's car like a complete loser. And it is all your fault. Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of him blaming me for his declined credit cards, Vivian aggressively pushed her way to the front of the group. She planted her hands on her hips and glared down at me with absolute contempt. He is absolutely right, Nia. Vivian snapped, her voice dripping with toxic authority. This entire disaster is your doing. A man's success is directly tied to the peace and cooperation he receives at home. You have been completely unsupportive since the moment you woke up today. You complained about taking the bus. You refused to go to the bank to help your husband. You are harboring dark, negative energy, and you projected that bad luck right onto my son. You practically cursed his day. I stared at my mother-in-law, actually amazed by her Olympic-level mental gymnastics. So your son stealing my money and bouncing his own credit cards is somehow the result of my negative energy, I asked. Do not use that disrespectful tone with me, Vivian shouted. You did not cater to him this morning. You did not send him off with a peaceful mind. A high-value man like Marcus needs a submissive, supportive wife to maintain his focus in the corporate world. You stressed him out with your constant demands, and it threw his entire financial alignment off balance. If you had just done what he asked and brought him the cash, none of this embarrassing nonsense would have happened. You are dragging this entire family down with your stubborn, broke mentality. Chloe stepped out from behind her mother, crossing her arms and looking around my beautiful penthouse with a sneer. She had always been incredibly jealous of me, despite the fact that she thought I was just a low-level data entry clerk. She married Preston purely for his money, and she spent every waking moment trying to prove she was better than everyone else. Honestly, Nia, I do not even know why Marcus puts up with you, Chloe said loudly, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. You are an absolute embarrassment. Look at you sitting there like you have done nothing wrong while my brother's reputation is in shreds. When Preston has a stressful day, I drop everything to make sure his life is perfectly managed. That is how a real woman acts. You are supposed to be his safety net, but instead you just act like a selfish dead weight. I let my eyes slowly drift from Vivian to Chloe, taking in their ridiculous designer outfits and their misplaced arrogance. They were defending a man who had secretly stolen their own family money to fund his fake lifestyle. They were standing in my living room, breathing my air and lecturing me about how to be a supportive woman. Preston finally stepped forward, moving past his wife and mother-in-law. He adjusted his fleece vest and looked at me with that signature condescending smirk. He clearly thought he was the ultimate savior of the day because he had covered the country club bill. He had absolutely no idea that the FBI was likely already securing warrants for his arrest. Let us all just calm down and look at the facts, Preston said, using his hands to gesture as if he were speaking to a group of unruly toddlers. Nia, your behavior on the phone was completely unacceptable. Marcus is a partner in my investment firm now. He represents my brand. When you embarrass him, you embarrass me. I had to swipe my own card to save him from being escorted out in handcuffs. That is $10,000 of my personal capital tied up because you refused to withdraw your savings account. Preston sighed heavily, acting as though he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. I understand that you do not grasp the complexities of corporate banking or high-yield investments, Nia. But you need to understand chain of command. Marcus is the head of this household. When he tells you to secure funds, you secure them without asking silly questions. Marcus nodded vigorously, stepping back behind Preston's protective shadow. Exactly, he chimed in. I am the man of this house. I provide this luxury roof over your head. I pay for this penthouse. The least you can do is show some basic respect and obedience when I ask for a simple favor. The sheer volume of their delusion was deafening. They had stormed into my sanctuary like a pack of rabid wolves, fully expecting me to cower in the corner and beg for forgiveness. They expected me to apologize for Marcus's crimes. They expected me to thank Preston for being a generous savior. They expected me to absorb their abuse, just like I had done for the past 3 years. I looked at Sterling, who was sitting quietly at the dining table, his hands folded neatly over the thick stack of legal documents. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The audience had gathered. The stage was perfectly set. The parasites had backed themselves into the tightest corner possible, and they were completely blind to the massive trap waiting beneath their feet. I slowly stood up from the velvet sofa, smoothing out the front of my tailored suit jacket. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I simply looked Marcus dead in the eyes and prepared to rip his entire universe apart. Before I could utter a single word, Preston mistook my silence for submission. He confidently stepped right into my line of sight, completely blocking Marcus from my view. He unbuttoned his expensive fleece vest and took a wide, authoritative stance, as if he were about to address a boardroom of junior interns. Reaching into his inner jacket pocket, he pulled out a folded legal document and tossed it onto my glass coffee table with a loud, dismissive slap. "Now listen closely, Naya," Preston said, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. "I know the events of today have been emotionally overwhelming for someone in your position. But in the world of high finance, we do not have the luxury of operating on emotions. We operate on macroeconomics. We operate on liquid capital and dynamic asset leveraging. Marcus has found himself in a temporary liquidity trap due to an unfortunate bureaucratic error at the bank." I looked down at the document resting on the glass table. It was a personal liability guarantee. "Since your husband's primary assets are currently tied up in administrative red tape," Preston continued, pacing back and forth like a college professor delivering a freshman lecture, "I have generously drafted a bridge loan agreement from my private equity fund. It will clear his country club debt, retrieve his vehicle from the impound lot, and provide a small buffer of operational cash for the household." He paused, clearly expecting me to drop to my knees and thank him for his profound generosity. When I simply stared at him without reacting, he pointed a stern finger at the paper. "All you need to do is sign as the secondary guarantor," he explained, speaking incredibly slowly as if English was not my first language. "It is a standard collateralized debt obligation. It simply states that if Marcus cannot clear the bridge loan within 30 days, your future wage garnishments and whatever meager retirement accounts you possess will serve as the default collateral for my firm. It is a very basic financial instrument, Nia. Even someone with your limited corporate exposure should be able to grasp the concept of secured debt." I stared at the paperwork, completely mesmerized by the absolute sheer audacity of the man. The interest rate printed boldly on the front page was 25%. It was a predatory loan bordering on criminal extortion. He was literally trying to trap me into indentured servitude to funnel money into his failing Ponzi scheme right in the middle of my own living room. Vivian let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, clapping her hands together. "Oh, thank the Lord for you, Preston," she exclaimed, looking at her white son-in-law with pure adoration and blind loyalty. "You are an absolute blessing to this family, always stepping up to lead when things get difficult." She turned her harsh glare back to me, her expression twisting into a mask of pure disgust. "Well, what are you waiting for, Nia?" she snapped. "Sign the paper. Preston is offering you a golden lifeline to save your husband from your own negative energy. You should be bending over backwards thanking this man for extending his personal resources to clean up a mess you caused. A real wife sacrifices for the greater good of her family. A real wife submits to the financial leadership of the men in the household. But you are always so incredibly short-sighted. You only ever think about your little checking account instead of the big picture." Chloe scoffed loudly, tossing her expensive highlighted hair over her shoulder and crossing her arms. "Exactly, Mom. Nia does not understand wealth preservation. She does not understand that it takes money to make money. Preston manages millions of dollars a day. He is a Wall Street visionary. He does not have the time or the patience to sit here and teach basic economics to a low-level data entry clerk. Just pick up a pen and sign the guarantee, Nia. Stop embarrassing us, and just do what the men tell you to do for once in your miserable life. I looked past Preston and made direct eye contact with Marcus. He was standing near the front foyer, looking incredibly nervous and sweating profusely. He knew about the massive fraudulent mortgage. He knew his bank accounts were permanently drained. But he had not told his mother, his sister, or his arrogant brother-in-law the actual truth. He had let them walk right into a slaughterhouse thinking they were the butchers. "This is a very generous offer, Preston," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and dangerously polite. "But I am slightly confused by the terms of this macroeconomics lesson. If Marcus is a high-ranking partner in your highly successful private equity fund, why do you need to garnish the wages of a low-level administrative assistant? Does your multi-million-dollar fund not have the basic operational liquidity to cover a simple $10,000 bar tab?" Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. The smug, arrogant smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer hostility. "You do not ask questions about the fund's operational mechanisms, Nia," he snapped, stepping closer to me in an attempt to use his physical height to intimidate me. "Institutional capital is tied up in long-term, high-yield investments. You cannot just liquidate massive corporate assets on a Saturday afternoon because you do not feel like supporting your husband. That is not how the real corporate world works. This bridge loan is a massive favor to your family. It is a structured instrument designed to teach you financial accountability." Vivian marched forward aggressively, pointing her perfectly manicured finger mere inches from my face. "You are the most ungrateful, stubborn woman I have ever had the displeasure of knowing," she yelled, her voice shrill and piercing. "You are going to sign that paper right now, or I swear I will make sure Marcus divorces you and takes full custody of my granddaughter. You are entirely unfit to be part of a high society family. You have a completely broke mentality, and you are holding my son back from his true potential." Chloe stepped up right next to her mother, nodding vigorously. "Preston is trying to protect the family brand, Nia," she added, her voice dripping with venom. "When Marcus looks bad, we all look bad. You are legally obligated to support him. Sign the paper, or we will make sure you walk away from this marriage with absolutely nothing." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice trembling slightly from the back of the room. "Just sign it, Nia. Please, we can talk about the details and the interest rates later. Just sign the paper so Preston can clear the country club accounts and we can move past this nightmare." Preston smirked, clearly thinking he had successfully regained control of the room. He reached into his pocket and produced an expensive silver pen, holding it out to me with a triumphant gleam in his eye. He thought he had successfully bullied a financially illiterate black woman into signing her life away to save a sinking ship. He thought his aggressive mansplaining and his fake financial jargon had thoroughly intimidated me into submission. I looked at the silver pen hovering in the air. I looked at the predatory contract resting on the glass table. And then I looked at Sterling, who was still sitting quietly at my massive dining table, observing the entire spectacle with the cold, calculated eyes of an apex predator. The audience had delivered their lines perfectly. The parasites had revealed their true nature, exposing their endless greed and their absolute lack of respect for my humanity. The trap was now fully loaded, and it was time to pull the trigger. I did not reach for the silver pen. I let Preston stand there with his arm extended awkwardly in the air until the smug, arrogant smile slowly melted off his face. The absolute silence in the penthouse stretched on for several agonizing seconds. I looked down at the predatory contract resting on the glass table, and then I reached out with a single manicured finger and pushed it back across the table toward him. "I am not signing that piece of garbage," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying with absolute clarity across the massive living room. Preston pulled his hand back as if the silver pen had suddenly caught fire. His jaw dropped slightly. He looked around the room as if he could not comprehend what had just happened. A black woman, a low-level administrative assistant, had just flatly rejected his financial command in front of an audience. Excuse me, Preston sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of purple. Did you just call a legally binding corporate liability document a piece of garbage? You clearly do not understand the complex legal framework of what I am offering you, Nia. This is a highly structured financial instrument. I understand it perfectly, Preston, I replied, leaning back against the velvet cushions of the sofa. It is a predatory loan with a 25% interest rate aimed directly at my personal wages. It is not a structured financial instrument. It is a desperate cash grab from a man whose supposed multi-million-dollar equity fund cannot even float a $10,000 country club tab without shaking down his own sister-in-law. Preston took a sharp step back as if I had physically struck him. His eyes darted nervously toward Marcus, and then back to me. "How dare you?" he hissed, his voice losing all its previous manufactured calm. "I manage portfolios that are worth more than you will see in 10 lifetimes. I am offering to save your husband from federal prison, and you sit there disrespecting me." Vivian could no longer contain her absolute fury. She shoved her way past Preston and stood directly over me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered hatred. "You are a stupid, ungrateful little girl!" she screamed, her voice shrill enough to rattle the expensive floor-to-ceiling windows. "Preston is a genius. He is a financial savior to this family. You are nothing but a broke, lazy woman who got lucky enough to marry my son. You are going to pick up that pen and sign your name right this second, or I will personally drag you to the ground and force your hand to write it." I looked up at my mother-in-law, completely unfazed by her pathetic physical threats. "You are welcome to try Vivian," I said, my voice turning ice cold. "But I highly recommend you check your surroundings before you make a move." Chloe stomped her foot, clad in an expensive designer heel, right onto my imported rug. "This is exactly why I told Marcus not to marry you," Chloe yelled, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "You have no class, Nia. You have no understanding of loyalty. When my husband asks for collateral, you give him collateral. You are literally watching your own family burn to the ground because you are too selfish to risk your pathetic little paycheck. You are a terrible wife and an even worse mother." The mention of my daughter, who was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet just a few feet away, sent a dark, dangerous thrill through my veins. They were crossing lines they could never uncross. It was at that exact moment that Marcus finally found his courage. Emboldened by his mother, his sister, and his arrogant brother-in-law, my husband stepped out from the back of the room. He puffed out his chest, trying desperately to reclaim his alpha male persona. He marched right up to the glass coffee table and slammed his fist down hard enough to make the predatory contract jump. "That is enough," Marcus roared, his face covered in a thick layer of nervous sweat. "I am absolutely done playing games with you, Nia. I am the man of this house. I am the head of this family. I make the executive decisions around here, and you follow them. That is the natural order of things." He leaned over the table, glaring at me with wild, desperate eyes. "You are going to sign that paper right now," he threatened, his voice shaking with toxic rage. "You are going to sign it, and you are going to apologize to Preston for disrespecting him in my home." I simply stared at him. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. "If you refuse," Marcus spat venom dripping from every single syllable, "you can pack your bags and get out of my house." The room went dead silent again. Even Vivian and Chloe looked slightly surprised by the absolute finality of his threat, but their surprise quickly morphed into cruel, triumphant smiles. "You heard me," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder and more confident as he issued his ultimate ultimatum. "My name is on the lease of this luxury penthouse. I pay the exorbitant rent. I provide the roof over your head. You are nothing but a guest in my kingdom, Nia. If you are not willing to support my financial vision and act like a proper cooperative wife, then you have absolutely no place in my home." He pointed a shaking finger toward the heavy oak double doors of the foyer. "If you do not pick up that silver pen and sign your name to that guarantee, you can take your bags and get out. You can take the baby and go live in a cheap motel. You can go ride the city bus all day for all I care. I will find a woman who actually knows how to respect a high-value man. I will replace you by next week." Vivian nodded in aggressive agreement. "That is right, Marcus," she cheered, clapping her hands together. "Put your foot down. Show her what happens when she disrespects the provider of the household." Let her go freeze on the streets. She will be crawling back here begging on her hands and knees by midnight when she realizes how hard the real world is without your money protecting her. Chloe laughed a sharp, mocking sound. Good luck paying for diapers with your data entry salary, Naya. You just ruined your own life because you wanted to be stubborn. I sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, letting the sheer magnitude of their audacity wash over me. The tension in the massive room was sky high. Any normal woman would have been completely crushed by the weight of this moment. A postpartum mother holding a newborn baby being aggressively screamed at by 4 adults and threatened with immediate homelessness by her own husband. It was a scene of such profound cruelty and manipulation that it almost felt surreal. Marcus stood tall, breathing heavily, staring down at me like a conquering king. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed he held the ultimate trump card. He thought the threat of losing this beautiful 6,000 square foot penthouse would absolutely terrify me into submission. He thought I was a helpless, dependent woman who would rather sign a predatory loan than face the harsh reality of the streets. He had absolutely no idea that he was standing in a building I owned. He had no idea that the luxury rug he was stomping on belonged to me. He had no idea that the rent he supposedly paid was secretly subsidized by my own holding company. I slowly turned my head and looked at Sterling. My brilliant lead attorney was sitting at the dining table, his hands perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask of corporate professionalism. But I could see the sharp glint of absolute predatory joy in his eyes. He knew exactly what was coming next. I looked back at Marcus and his toxic family. They wanted a lesson in macroeconomics. They wanted to talk about who funded this lifestyle and who held the real power in this room. I reached out and picked up the television remote resting on the edge of the glass coffee table. I did not speak. I simply pointed the remote directly at the massive 85-inch flat screen mounted on the marble wall behind Marcus and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life with a soft electronic chime. The sudden bright glow cast a harsh, sharp light across the faces of my furious in-laws. Sterling had already synced his secure laptop to the television display. Instead of the daytime talk shows Vivian usually watched, the massive screen was now projecting a highly detailed forensic accounting web. It was a complex cash flow chart mapping out a massive network of international wire transfers, shell corporations, and offshore banking institutions. The intricate red lines on the graph all originated from a single node labeled with Marcus's name and his corporate banking credentials. The lines branched out like poisonous veins, bypassing legitimate investment portfolios and authorized stock exchanges entirely. Instead, every single red line terminated at a massive, bold circle located well outside the jurisdiction of the United States. Everyone in the room stared at the screen in absolute confusion. They had stormed in here expecting me to cower and cry. They expected me to pack my bags and beg for mercy. Instead, they were looking at a high-definition financial autopsy of their entire fake empire. Preston recognized the offshore routing numbers immediately. I watched as his confident posture collapsed in real time. His jaw went slack and the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and violently ill. The silver pen he had been holding slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly onto the glass coffee table. I kept my voice perfectly level, cutting through the heavy tension like a scalpel. Preston, what kind of macro investing are you doing, where Marcus's $2 million flows straight into your Bahamas casino account? The entire room went dead silent. The heavy oak doors could have slammed shut, and it would have sounded like a bomb going off. The air in the penthouse suddenly felt incredibly heavy, suffocating the arrogance right out of their lungs. $2 million, Chloe repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with sudden panic. Preston, what is she talking about? What casino account? You told me Marcus only invested a few $100,000. I did not give Preston a chance to spin another lie. I stood up and walked over to the television, pointing at the largest red line on the graph. He did not just invest the $300,000 he stole from the fraudulent mortgage on this penthouse, I explained, looking directly at Marcus, who was now visibly trembling. Marcus wanted to be a massive player at the country club. He wanted to secure a lifetime seat at the table. So he leveraged his corporate clients' accounts at his financial firm. He illegally diverted corporate matching funds to inflate his initial buy-in. He handed you $2 million in stolen corporate and personal capital, Preston. Marcus let out a pathetic whimpering sound, covering his face with his hands. He knew the absolute truth was finally out in the open. The $10,000 bar tab was the least of his problems. He had embezzled millions from his employer to feed his brother-in-law's multi-level marketing scam. Vivian shook her head aggressively, her heavy perfume wafting through the air as she frantically tried to reject reality. "This is a trick," she yelled, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You fabricated this nonsense on your computer to make my son look bad." Preston is a certified financial manager. He manages real estate portfolios and corporate bonds. He does not gamble with client money. You are just a spiteful, jealous woman trying to tear this family apart. I looked at Vivian with pure, unfiltered pity. "Your son is a thief, Vivian, and your son-in-law is a con artist. There is no private equity fund. There are no corporate bonds. Preston has been running a textbook Ponzi scheme from his rented Midtown office. He takes money from gullible men like Marcus to pay the fake quarterly dividends of his older investors while skimming millions off the top to fund his own luxury lifestyle. And when he is not skimming it, he is gambling it away at high-stakes baccarat tables in Nassau." "That is a complete lie!" Preston shouted, his voice cracking wildly. He took a step toward me, but Sterling immediately stood up from the dining table. Sterling was a head taller than Preston and carried the quiet, menacing authority of a man who could destroy lives with a single phone call. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. "Those are proprietary corporate documents," Preston stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the television screen. "You hacked into my secure servers, Naya. That is a federal crime. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage. You have absolutely no idea how to interpret those cash flow metrics. The Bahamas account is a legitimate offshore tax shelter for our international clients." Sterling let out a dark, terrifying chuckle. "A tax shelter," he mocked, stepping around the glass table to stand beside me. "Mr. Preston, we pulled these records directly from the internal ledger your own assistant surrendered to the federal authorities this morning. There is no tax shelter. You wired $2 million of stolen corporate funds directly to the Grand Bahama Resort and Casino over the last 4 months. You lost every single penny of it." Chloe gasped out loud, covering her mouth with her hands. Her designer sunglasses slipped off the top of her head and fell to the floor. "Preston, tell me this is not true," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Tell me you did not lose our money. Tell me you did not take $2 million from Marcus. If the authorities are involved, they will seize our house. They will freeze my bank accounts." Preston shoved her hands away, his carefully constructed Wall Street persona completely disintegrating. "Shut up, Chloe," he hissed, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door. "We just need to leave. We need to go back to the office and shred the secondary ledgers. We can contain this. We can call my lawyers and claim Marcus wired the funds independently." "You are not going anywhere, Preston," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Do you really think I just found this out today? Do you really think I sat back and watched you steal from my community without preparing a proper response? I ordered my forensic accounting team to audit your entire pathetic operation 8 months ago. We tracked every single stolen dollar. We documented every forged signature. We traced every wire transfer you sent from your phone while you were sitting at my dining table eating Thanksgiving dinner." Marcus fell to his knees on the imported rug, the sheer weight of his impending doom crushing him into the floor. He finally understood why his bank accounts were frozen. He finally understood why his car was towed. It was not a bank error. It was not a temporary glitch. It was a targeted demolition. "You did this," Marcus whispered, staring at the floor with hollow, dead eyes. "You shut off my cards. You called the country club. You took my car." "I did," I replied, looking down at the pathetic man I had once promised to love. "I took it all away, Marcus. Because none of it was ever yours to begin with. You stood in that hospital room this morning and handed me a $20 bill. You told me to take the bus because you thought you held all the power. You thought you were the undisputed king of a financial empire, but you were just a foolish puppet handing stolen money to a gambling addict." The room was paralyzed in a state of absolute shock. Vivian was hyperventilating, clutching her chest as she stared at the massive television screen. The brightly colored red lines tracing the stolen millions were a glaring, undeniable testament to their collective greed and stupidity. The loud, arrogant demands they had been screaming just moments ago had completely vanished, replaced by the suffocating silence of total defeat. The parasites had finally realized they were trapped in a burning house, and I was the one holding the match. Preston tried to laugh, but it came out as a desperate choking sound. He pointed a shaking finger at the television screen and then turned his furious gaze towards Sterling. "You think a colorful digital chart proves anything?" he spat, trying desperately to rebuild his shattered authority. "I am a licensed financial fiduciary. I have entire teams of aggressive corporate lawyers on retainer who will bury you in litigation until you are living in a cardboard box, Nia. You cannot just invent a forensic audit and expect anyone to believe a low-level data entry clerk outsmarted a boutique private equity firm. I will sue you for everything you own. I will take this ridiculous penthouse and I will leave you bankrupt." I did not even blink at his pathetic, empty threats. I simply raised my hand and gestured to Sterling. My lead attorney calmly unlatched the brass locks of his leather briefcase. He did not pull out a single sheet of paper or a flimsy folder. He pulled out a massive 400-page binder stamped with the official gold seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. He handed it to me with a slight, respectful bow. I stood up, lifted the incredibly heavy binder, and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table right on top of Preston's predatory 25% interest loan contract. The loud thud echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. "That is the official federal indictment file, Preston," I said, my voice ringing with absolute cold authority. "It contains every single piece of evidence the FBI needs to put you away for the rest of your natural life. Section 1 details the exact names and financial records of the 75 innocent families you defrauded over the last 4 years. Section 2 contains the intercepted encrypted emails, where you specifically instructed your offshore bankers to falsify the quarterly dividend reports. And Section 3 is my personal favorite. It contains high-definition security photographs of you sitting at the baccarat tables in Nassau, gambling away the college funds of hard-working people in our community while drinking $1,000 champagne. Preston stared at the thick binder as if it were a venomous snake about to strike him. His chest heaved up and down in rapid, shallow breaths. The confident, arrogant posture of the untouchable Wall Street savior was completely gone. He looked exactly like what he truly was, a cheap, cowardly criminal who had finally been backed into an inescapable corner. "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with," he whispered, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of terror and lingering supremacist entitlement. "You cannot do this to me. I am a highly respected member of the financial elite in this city. I play golf with state senators. I have private dinners with federal judges. Do you really think the federal authorities are going to take the word of an angry, bitter black woman over a recognized corporate executive like me? They will laugh you right out of the precinct. I will make one phone call to my golf buddies, and this entire investigation will disappear before dinner." I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that made him take an involuntary step backward. "You are absolutely right, Preston," I said, tilting my head slightly. "You do know a lot of important people. But unfortunately for you, none of those important people have an $80 million corporate legal team working around the clock to ensure your total and complete destruction. You see, I did not just send a random anonymous tip to the authorities. My holding company officially retained 3 former federal prosecutors to act as special consultants on this exact case. We hand-delivered this meticulously curated evidence packet directly to the regional director of the FBI White-Collar Crime Division this morning. They did not laugh, Preston. They immediately drafted a federal arrest warrant." Chloe let out a sudden, blood-curdling scream. She lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Preston's expensive fleece vest and shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying." "Preston," she shrieked, her face twisted in pure agony and panic. "Tell me you did not steal all that money. We just put a $200,000 non-refundable down payment on the new summer house in the Hamptons. We just enrolled the kids in that elite private academy. If they freeze our accounts, how are we supposed to pay for our luxury lifestyle? You promised me we were entirely secure. You promised me we were rich. Preston shoved his wife away with brutal force, sending Chloe stumbling back into the heavy marble kitchen island. "Shut up, Chloe," he roared, his face completely red with rage. "I did this for us. I did this so you could parade around the country club and act like you were better than everyone else. Do you honestly think your little boutique marketing firm pays for diamond tennis bracelets and Hamptons beach houses? You spent the stolen investor money just as fast as I brought it in. If I go down, you are coming right down with me as a co-conspirator. You signed the joint federal tax returns every single year, knowing the math did not add up." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest, as if she were having a massive heart attack. She looked at her daughter, who was now sobbing hysterically on the floor, clutching her designer handbag. Then she looked at her son Marcus, who was still curled up in a pathetic, trembling ball on my imported rug. Her entire world, her entire identity built on the fake illusion of high society. Superiority was burning to ashes right in front of her eyes. "You ruined us!" Vivian wailed, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. Her heavy perfume could not mask the stench of her absolute despair. "You could have just kept this a secret, Nia. You could have handled this privately within the family. Why did you have to involve the federal government and ruin our good name? You are destroying your own family over money." I turned my cold, unyielding gaze toward my mother-in-law. "You are not my family, Vivian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "You are a collection of greedy parasites who attached yourselves to my wealth while treating me like dirt on your shoes. You sat there in the hospital and watched your son hand me a $20 bill after I pushed a child out of my body. You stood in my living room just 5 minutes ago and told me I was going to be homeless. You do not get to beg for family loyalty after you spent 3 entire years trying to completely break my spirit." Suddenly, a loud, piercing sound cut through the heavy tension in the penthouse. It was faint at first, but it rapidly grew louder and more intense, the unmistakable wailing of heavy police sirens echoing up from the downtown streets below. Everyone in the room froze in absolute terror. Preston sprinted to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the valet driveway. I did not need to look. I already knew exactly what was happening down there. My private security team stationed in the lobby had just radioed Sterling to confirm the arrival of the authorities. "There are 6 federal vehicles pulling up to the building," Preston whispered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal of pure primal panic. "They are blocking all the exits. There are agents in tactical gear getting out of the vans." He backed away from the window, his hands trembling so violently he could barely keep them at his sides. His eyes darted around the massive penthouse, looking for an escape route that simply did not exist. He turned back to me, dropping all pretenses of authority and privilege. "Nia, please," he begged, tears welling up in his eyes. "We can make a deal. I can wire you the $300,000 Marcus stole from the house right now. I have a secret reserve account in the Cayman Islands. Just call your lawyers and tell them to retract the file. Tell the FBI there was a massive accounting error. I will give you anything you want. You cannot buy your way out of a federal indictment with more stolen money." "Preston," I said, walking slowly toward him until there were only a few feet between us. "You thought you were the smartest man in the room. You thought you could walk into my home, insult my intelligence, demand my wages, and leave as a conquering hero. You thought your privilege made you absolutely invincible. But the truth is, you were a dead man walking the moment you sent me that mocking text message this morning. You dug your own grave and I simply provided the shovel." Preston's legs finally gave out. The arrogant supremacist who had spent years talking down to me suddenly collapsed onto his knees right next to Marcus. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified hollow shell of a man. He looked at the thick federal binder resting on the coffee table, and then up at me, his eyes filled with absolute helpless dread. The heavy sound of combat boots and loud authoritative voices began to echo from the private elevator shaft in the hallway outside my front doors. The authorities had bypassed the lobby and were coming straight to the top floor to secure the targets. The execution of Preston's fake empire was officially complete. The loudest, most arrogant voice in the room had been reduced to a pathetic, whimpering mess on my floor, and the ultimate finale was just moments away. Marcus watched Preston crumble, and something inside him finally snapped. The sheer terror of federal prison completely overrode whatever twisted loyalty he had left for his brother-in-law. He scrambled to his feet, practically kicking Preston away from him. He backed up until his shoulders hit the marble wall, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at the man who had just promised him millions. "I had absolutely nothing to do with his offshore accounts," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking wildly as he looked between me and Sterling. "I was a victim. He lied to me. I did not know it was a Ponzi scheme. I am not going down for his crimes. I am a respectable financial manager. I will fight this. I still have assets." He frantically adjusted his ruined suit jacket, trying desperately to pull himself together. "I will hire the best white-collar defense attorney in Atlanta," Marcus declared, his voice growing slightly louder as he tried to convince himself of his own lies. "I still have this house. I can pull another line of credit against the remaining equity. I will leverage this penthouse to the absolute limit to keep myself out of prison. You hear me, Nia? This is still my property, and I will use it to save my own life." I did not laugh. I did not even smile. I slowly walked around the glass coffee table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor until I was standing less than 2 feet away from him. He tried to puff out his chest to look down at me, but the absolute terror in his eyes betrayed him. "You still have this house?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Marcus, when you went behind my back and forged my signature on that $300,000 collateral loan, did you even bother to actually check the county deed? Did you look at the legal ownership records before you sat in front of that shady notary and committed a federal crime?" Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. "I signed the master lease," he stammered. "The management company recognized me as the primary tenant with the right to purchase. My buddy at the mortgage firm processed the paperwork. It was completely foolproof." "Nothing you do is foolproof, Marcus," I said, staring straight into his terrified eyes. "You signed a subsidized lease agreement with a third-party vendor. You never held a single ounce of equity in this property. The official county deed states that this entire penthouse is owned outright by a commercial real estate conglomerate called N Holdings." Marcus frowned, his brain struggling to process the information through his panic. "N Holdings," he repeated quietly. "I do not care what the holding company is called." My buddy pushed the loan through. I took one final step forward, completely invading his space. "Let me spell it out for you, Marcus. The N stands for Nia. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of N Holdings. I bought this penthouse in cash 2 years ago. You just forged my signature to place a fraudulent lien on a property that I already own. You did not just steal from a bank. You committed federal mortgage fraud against my corporation." The last remaining shred of color completely vanished from Marcus's face. His mouth opened and closed, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked at Sterling, who simply nodded and tapped the thick federal binder on the table. The illusion was entirely shattered. He had no house. He had no equity. He only had a guaranteed ticket to federal prison, and the FBI was currently riding the elevator up to collect him. Marcus sank to his knees on the imported rug, his hands trembling violently as he stared up at me. He had lost his expensive car, his bank accounts, his elite club membership, and his freedom. But there was one final piece of his massive, fragile ego left to dismantle. His entire identity, his entire sense of superiority was wrapped up in his mid-level corporate management position. He had spent years telling me his career was vastly superior to mine, and that I could never understand the pressure of the real business world. I looked down at him and prepared to deliver the final strike. "You told me this morning that I did not understand how to make real money, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, but carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final sentence. "You said I lacked ambition, and that I needed to respect the financial provider of this house. Well, I have one more corporate update for you. He looked up, tears streaming down his face, completely broken. "What more could you possibly take from me?" He choked out his voice, barely a whisper. "I did not take anything," I replied smoothly. "I simply made a strategic business acquisition." Yesterday afternoon, N Holdings officially finalized a leveraged buyout of the financial firm where you are currently employed. We aggressively acquired a 60% controlling stake. Marcus gasped, his eyes widening in pure, absolute horror. He finally understood the staggering scale of the empire he had been disrespecting. The woman he threw a $20 bill at was the silent architect of his entire reality. "That is right, Marcus," I said, my words ringing with total uncompromising authority. "I am the majority shareholder. I own the building you work in, and I own the desk you sit at, which means as of yesterday, I am your boss. And my first executive action as the new owner is very simple. You are fired, effective immediately and with extreme prejudice for corporate embezzlement." Before Marcus could even process the reality of being fired by his own wife, the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse did not just open. They were violently kicked open. The loud crack of splintering wood echoed through the apartment as a team of federal agents in dark tactical windbreakers swarmed into the grand foyer. "FBI, nobody move," the lead agent shouted, sweeping the room with commanding presence. Preston tried to scramble backward like a cornered rat, but two agents immediately grabbed him, throwing him forcefully against the marble wall and slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Marcus did not even try to run. He stayed on his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as an agent pulled his arms behind his back and cuffed him. Vivian let out a guttural, devastating wail. The grand illusion of her high society life shattered permanently into a million unfixable pieces. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching her chest and crying hysterically as she watched her golden child being read his federal Miranda rights. Chloe was hyperventilating, screaming at the agents to let her husband go, frantically pulling at her own hair in a state of absolute mindless panic. I did not offer them a single glance of pity. The submissive woman who used to shrink herself to make them comfortable was dead. I turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the pathetic pleading, leaving the federal agents to take out the trash. I walked slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, crossing my arms as I looked out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city was beautiful, and it was finally all mine. The heavy oak doors finally closed behind the federal agents, taking the noise and the chaos out of my penthouse forever. I stood by the glass window for a long time, just watching the red and blue flashing lights pull away from the valet driveway down below. That was the last time I ever saw my husband as a free man. The justice system moved with surprising speed when the evidence was wrapped in an $80 million bow and handed directly to the prosecutors. Marcus tried to negotiate a plea deal, but there was no escaping the forged signatures on the mortgage and the stolen corporate funds. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in a federal penitentiary. He sends me pathetic letters, sometimes begging for forgiveness and asking to see his daughter, but they go straight into my office, shredder unread. He lost his career, his reputation, and the family he took completely for granted, all because he could not respect the woman who was secretly funding his entire life. Preston was not nearly as lucky. The federal prosecutors made an absolute example out of him. For defrauding dozens of hardworking families and running a massive Ponzi scheme, the judge handed Preston a brutal 10-year sentence. The arrogant Wall Street savior who loved to lecture me about macroeconomics was reduced to an inmate number wearing a standard-issue prison uniform. But perhaps the most poetic justice fell upon the women who had stood in my living room and threatened me with immediate homelessness. With Preston's assets completely seized by the government and Marcus drowning in court-ordered restitution debt, Vivian and Chloe lost absolutely everything. They were immediately evicted from their sprawling homes in the wealthy suburbs. All the designer handbags, the diamond tennis bracelets, and the luxury vehicles were auctioned off by the state to pay back the families Preston had stolen from. The elite country club friends who used to praise them instantly stopped answering their phone calls, pretending they had never even met them. The high society facade they had built their entire toxic identities around crumbled to dust. Without the stolen money funding their unearned arrogance, they were forced to move into a rundown two-bedroom apartment in one of the most dangerous slum neighborhoods in the city. To survive and chip away at their massive legal fees, Chloe and Vivian had to take minimum wage jobs, working the grueling overnight shift at a local 24-hour laundromat. The women who used to sip expensive champagne and mock my ambition were now spending their nights scrubbing sticky linoleum floors, folding cheap towels, and washing other people's dirty laundry just to keep the lights on. It has been 2 years since that chaotic morning in the hospital. My daughter is now a thriving, beautiful toddler running freely around the very penthouse Marcus tried to steal from us. She will never know the smell of that city bus, and she will never know what it feels like to be treated as an inconvenience by the man who was supposed to protect her. My holding company has more than doubled in value since the merger. I did not just survive the ultimate betrayal, I built an absolute fortress on top of its ruins. I want to take a moment to look directly at you watching this right now. As women, we are so often conditioned to shrink ourselves to make the fragile people around us comfortable. We are told to hide our success, swallow our pride, and accept whatever tiny scraps of respect a weak partner is willing to toss our way. We convince ourselves that suffering in silence and playing small is some kind of noble sacrifice for the sake of keeping the peace in a toxic family. But I need you to hear this loud and clear. Never hand the keys to your life to someone who only sees you as a passenger. If they demand your submission but cannot provide actual protection, they do not deserve a single ounce of your loyalty. Marcus accused me of having a broke mentality because I refused to fund his flashy delusions. But true wealth is not about what you drive or what elite country club you belong to. True wealth is having the absolute freedom to walk away from anyone who disrespects you, and having the power to completely destroy the tables you were never invited to sit at. If someone throws a $20 bill at you and tells you to find your own way home, let them walk away. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you are quiet and naive. Let them play their foolish little games right up until the exact moment you pull the rug out from under them and buy the entire transportation company. You are the sole architect of your reality. Do not let arrogant, insecure people dictate your worth based on their own massive failures. Now I want to hear from all of you. What was the exact moment you realized your partner or your toxic in-laws were completely underestimating you, and what was your ultimate revenge when you finally took your power back? Drop your story in the comments below, because your victory might be exactly the inspiration another woman needs to read today. If you enjoyed watching this absolute takedown, hit that like and subscribe button for more stories of leveling up and reclaiming your peace. Stay ruthless, know your worth, and never let anyone put you in the back seat of your own life.